are representatives of the Florida Department of Transportation District 1 staff, including Secretary L.K. Nandum, Nicole Mills, Albert Horn, and Walter Brueggemann. And so those are the folks that have been most closely involved in this project over the years. We very much appreciate the opportunity to present the findings of the Florida Avenue Road Diet Test and provide recommendations from city and DOT staff. So in developing our recommendations, we really carefully looked at the deficiencies and the conditions that existed when the project began back in 2020. We've looked over more than 2 years worth of data and analysis. We've collected extensive community input and the corridor options provided by the AIRS group and DOT. So there's been a lot that has gone into developing today's presentation and our recommendations. Prior to the lane repurposing, and y'all remember that Florida Avenue's lanes were extremely substandard. They were 8.5 feet wide, the exact width of a tractor trailer, which really didn't leave a whole lot of room between the cars, the trucks, the folks on the sidewalk, and so it was a fairly unsafe situation. The road diet test expanded those lanes 30% to an 11-foot width and something more in keeping of today's current standards. The sidewalks, though, are still narrow, they're still substandard. We still have accessibility challenges and issues with overall drainage in the corridor, so there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. What's out there today is truly just an interim cross-section as it exists today, and the road continuously ranks as a high-risk corridor when looked at from a countywide standpoint. Safety was certainly one of the biggest concerns and reasons for this effort going forward. Something that we've committed to through our Division 0, our Complete Street Policy, not only adopted here in the City of Lakeland's comprehensive plan, but also the Polk TPO's Complete Street Policy, those of the state of Florida. So there has been a concerted effort to address safety as part of this project. But in the process of making South Florida less hazardous for pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users, we've also had a focus on creating a more vital corridor that supports the economic development objectives of the Community Redevelopment Agency and the business owners, the property owners that have invested in this corridor. So one of the biggest complaints that we've heard about the road diet is traffic delays. And while there are many extraordinary times when an accident brings everything to a standstill, this corridor has been monitored probably more closely than any other in the city, probably in the city's history. And really the data just does not bear out a lot of the concerns that we have heard in terms of traffic delay and increased travel time. For most of the day, traffic flows freely and there's virtually no difference before and after the test. There is a bit slower traffic run time during the PMP period, but that is really about a 14 to 72 second increase in travel time. If you look at probably the worst of the worst, and you know, the kind of the rare instance where there is a problem in the corridor, what we're looking at is about a 6-minute travel time between Ariana and Lime. So you're looking at really a 2.5 to 3 minute increase in travel time, which on a 1 mile corridor of this nature is not significant. The average travel speed in the corridor has decreased from 33 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour, which is the posted speed of Florida Avenue. And one of the things that's important to note here is that 30 miles an hour is really the optimum travel speed that you want to have in an urban arterial corridor, because it's just really the most efficient for the road. But it's also a tipping point between what is really safe and unsafe for pedestrians and bicyclists. And you've seen examples of this in the past where if a pedestrian gets hit at 40 miles an hour, there's only a 10% chance of survival. If they get hit by a car at 20 miles an hour, there's an 80 to 90% chance of survival. So 30 miles an hour is about that break-even point, and so 30 is what we've really tried to hit in terms of the travel speeds. In terms of traffic volume, the volumes in the corridor have decreased by about 14.7%. We're seeing about a 5 to 10% diversion of traffic onto parallel roads, including Sykes Boulevard, but that really has not had a significant impact on Sykes Boulevard itself, which is the closest parallel State Road corridor to Florida Avenue. The number of crashes that we have overall is comparable, and in fact, the crash types that we have in this corridor are less severe than what we had previously. We certainly, though, have seen an uptick in terms of rear end collisions, which isn't unusual in an area where you're transitioning, changing traffic patterns and people getting used to the new traffic patterns. You tend to see an increase in rear end collisions, and that's what we've seen here. The EMS response times are very comparable today as they were before the test began. And so from that standpoint, we have not seen a negative impact to public safety in terms of crashes on the roadway or EMS travel time. So in terms of the side street analysis, we heard a number of concerns at the July 11th public meeting about specific locations in the Dixieland and South Lake Morton neighborhoods adjacent to the corridor. So what we've done is we stepped back, asked our city's traffic operations division to collect additional analysis and data on select locations, including Missouri, New York Avenue, South Boulevard, and in those corridors. What we've seen is we've seen an increase in traffic in terms of the daily volumes on Missouri and New York, which are, by the way, both collector roadways, and so they are not neighborhood streets. They run through neighborhoods, but they are a higher class of roadway that can carry more traffic. What we've seen, though, is that the average speeds have continued to decline on those roadways as well. So even though we have more traffic, the speeds are less, and really that does create a safer condition. And as we've talked about, in the past, we've had New York and Missouri were through streets that actually connected all the way up. Both of them connected up to Lime Street and carried a lot more traffic than they do today. So. I think from that standpoint, we really aren't seeing a major issue on any of those roads. We've also looked at volumes on some of the neighborhood streets south of the district in between Dixieland and Beacon Hill. And again, we didn't see an increase in traffic volumes on those side streets. We did see an increase in speed on Maxwell. But again, it was all within the speed limit or what you would expect to find on a neighborhood street. So based on the counts collected earlier this year, we're not seeing an issue from that standpoint. Now, certainly where I'm sure you all have heard concerns and comments before the test and during the test are the streets between Florida Avenue and Lake Hollingsworth south of the South Lake Morton neighborhood. Again, we have seen a slight increase on most of those, Palmola, High Britain, Kenworth in terms of volume, but a decrease in the travel speed. But we've seen a noticeable increase in traffic on Maxwell Street from a percentage standpoint. The volumes there went from 608 vehicles a day to about 828 vehicles a day, and the speed increased by 8%. What's important to note here is that we have had conversations and ongoing conversations with the neighborhood about an overall traffic management plan in this area. Earlier this year, traffic calming was installed on Palmola. We've recently installed speed humps on Patton Heights and some of the other streets in this area. And there's a brick restoration project that is being scheduled for Belvedere. So there are things that are being done to address the traffic management issues between Florida Avenue and Lake Hollingsworth. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn over to Cindy Glover. She's our Community Engagement Coordinator for Community and Economic Development to discuss what the community has said and her analysis of the comments received to date.
Glad she was behind you because I couldn't see her in the room.
For the record, Cindy Glover with Community and Economic Development. And we are going to do a quick tour of over 4,000 comments in just a couple minutes.
Okay, great.
So we don't need to tell you that there are a contingent of people who are strongly opposed to the road diet. Of the comments that we have received, and we have received them through social media. We read all of those Facebook comments and Twitter and so forth. The public meetings, the emails, we had the MetroQuest survey that FDOT sent out, and it received over 2,276 responses, and some of those responses involved multiple notes on different screens. We also got 69 written comments at the July 11th meeting at the RP Funding Center. So we have listened very closely to all of those concerns. We've read them all. And there may be some things that, as a result of those, we did some additional traffic counts, we did some additional analysis, which we just shared. There may be some things we can do to address specific complaints, but it's also worth noting that a smaller group of people did take the time to say that they feel safer on the road, that they appreciate the wider lanes, and that they want the configuration to be made permanent. We have found that area residents and businesses tend to be more supportive of the project. Commuters tend to be more critical, but we will get into that. Going beyond love it or hate it was, we're going to summarize some of the complaints that we've heard, because we did ask people to tell us what it is that they are upset about. To summarize the top complaints, a lot of people have pointed out that South Florida Avenue is one of the only direct north-south routes for people who live in North Lakeland or South Lakeland and work on the opposite side of town. Sykes Boulevard is an alternate option, but we don't yet have a well-developed bypass system. Of course, traffic speed alone is a pretty poor metric for quality of life, but supportive projects are not in place, fully developed, and people have pointed that out. The data is clear that traffic delays on that 1 mile stretch of the project are usually a minute or two at most, but there is a cumulative effect of all of the lights and congestions before and after the Dixieland corridor, and traversing the city from one end to the other can feel long and frustrating. The city's dramatic population growth has put more cars on our roads. Many critics of the road diet think the city might not be properly taking that into account. We've heard the concerns about increased traffic on side streets, and we did the additional counts to measure it. Overall, the roads are operating well, but we know all it takes is a few aggressive drivers to make people feel unsafe in their homes and in their neighborhoods. And that's something that might be addressable through increased law enforcement. People have told us the concrete separators are ugly, and we agree. Yep. They are. They were never intended to be permanent, but yeah, no argument from us on that one. Turning. We have heard complaints about the time it takes to turn left at various intersections. Several people requested dedicated turn signals at intersections including Orange, Frank Lloyd Wright, and East Belmar. Depending on the weight capacity of the mast arms and other practical considerations, that's definitely something that could be pursued. People have told us that they rarely see pedestrians or bicyclists on the road as it currently exists. It depends on the time of day, but the test, as you all will recall, was designed to see how lane reduction would affect traffic. We haven't really provided any improvements or amenities for pedestrians yet, and that could very well change. If you build it, they would come. We've heard complaints about the cost of the test, but the alternatives would not have been significantly cheaper. The estimate for barrels was $1.34 million. Low-profile barrier wall was $1.21 million. Virtual traffic modeling would also have been costly. And the city has a responsibility to get the best data possible before embarking on a major multi-year transportation project. Not all negative complaints. We have also heard some positive feedback, and on the positive side, the primary comments we've heard are appreciation for the wider lanes. Drivers feel better with a little bit more space between vehicles. Pedestrians feel safer with a little more distance between themselves and mirrors and cars and larger vehicles. Many people who live in the area have told us the delays aren't excessive. that the trade-off of a minute or two is worthwhile. And there is enthusiasm for economic development, including streetscaping, architectural features, and so forth. Not all Dixieland business owners support the road diet, but some of them do. There are a substantial number of small community-oriented businesses that would love to see wider sidewalks and more investment in making the Dixieland corridor a pedestrian-friendly retail area. These were some of the folks who were, volunteered to do videos early on in this campaign, but we have heard from quite a few others, just to put that in perspective. We also received some letters of support from stakeholder groups, including the Lakeland Community Redevelopment Agency, the Lakeland Downtown Development Authority, Historic Lakeland, and the Lake Morton Neighborhood Association. All 4 groups said they would like to see the 3-lane road diet configuration be made permanent with streetscaping and amenities for pedestrians. So, 4,000 plus comments distilled, but those are the highlights. And with that, I will pass it back to my colleague Chuck Barmby.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cindy. Kind of starting off, what we'll talk about are the corridor options that were identified through the AIRS report that was developed on behalf of the Community Redevelopment Agency. And so, as you can see here, there were several options that were more kind of multimodal based. We had options up to and including a one-way repair system to connect Sykes Boulevard and Florida Avenue. Those were reviewed at the July 11th public meeting and have been reviewed by the CRA, the Downtown Development Authority, other stakeholders to really solicit feedback. And most of what we've heard, and this is what Cindy highlighted, is that there's a desire for a 3-lane cross-section from many of those groups. The Florida Department of Transportation has also reviewed the corridor as well, the data and analysis that they've collected, and have come up with 2 options for the corridor, one being a no-build. And by this, the no-build is going back to a 4-lane section without a middle turn lane because, as noted before, because the previous 5-lane cross-section was non-compliant, it would not be acceptable to go back to that previous cross-section. So the no-build in this instance is 4 lanes undivided, much like Lakeland Hills Boulevard, keeping the sidewalks generally the same and the curb line generally the same. The build alternative would be a 3-lane reconstruction, generally, as we'll be talking about here in a minute, with wider sidewalks, wider travel lanes, landscaping, and other enhancements to really fill out the corridor. In terms of the production process, what is important to note here is that we've gone through the planning studies, we've gone through what is in essence a project development and environmental study phase, which is something we didn't do through a computer modeling. It was a real world experience to really look at traffic diversion and traffic impacts. And so that process for the most part has been completed. Now we're getting to the point where we're ready to start moving forward towards design, right-of-way acquisition, construction, the traditional phases of project implementation that you would find on a regular roadway. But we're really at the point now of needing to move forward in a direction. So getting to staff's recommendations. City staff believes that the 3-lane configuration, while it's not perfect, is the most appropriate configuration for Florida Avenue in this area. And we believe that a reconstruction to include wider sidewalks is critical with the appropriate landscaping, streetscaping, really urban design treatments that a corridor like this really deserves. The concrete barriers should be removed and the sidewalks widened because, again, the concrete separators were only intended to be temporary. They are not the permanent solution here. We would want to see the intersections improved to make the crosswalks more visible. We also want to use those as opportunities for decorative improvements to create some type of placemaking or some type of theme for the Dixieland CRA area. We definitely still need to evaluate the merge areas north and south of the corridor, because those are areas where we still receive the greatest number of complaints, and areas where there's probably some improvements that can be made to improve the transition. We would want to look at an on-demand pedestrian signal at Belmar, something to improve the crossings there coming out of the South Lake Morton neighborhood to the business district. We'd want the Peach Line to be made permanent in some form or fashion with continued funding by the Department of Transportation and working with the Lakeland Area Mass Transit District. We still continue to need to discuss the truck restrictions in the corridor, try to use Hardin Boulevard and Sykes Boulevard as much as possible as the truck route around downtown and Dixieland, and there's an opportunity to do that. And certainly, we would want to see increased law enforcement in the corridor to make sure that we address aggressive driving, speeding, some of the other safety issues that were noted in the comments. So in terms of the recommended option, we recommend option 1 as identified by AIRS. That does include a 12-foot wide sidewalk on each side of Florida Avenue, 10.5-foot travel lanes in each direction on Florida Avenue with an 11-foot wide middle turn lane and/or landscape median islands in the middle of the road to help manage traffic and create more of a vibrant urban form in this corridor. We would also ask and certainly would want to work with DOT and the Citrus Connection on 1 or 2 bus pullout locations in the corridor as well, to be able to support the Gold Line and some of the comments we've received about transit service in Florida Avenue corridor itself. So we believe that this is the most appropriate for the area that we're talking about, a business district that is adjacent to downtown Lakeland. We still have other investments, and of course, subject to the city budgeting process that would be discussed as well, including additional traffic calming, traffic management ideas and options east of Florida Avenue, including the installation of potentially speed humps on High Britain. I know that we have talked about the potential of truncating High Britain before Florida Avenue. There are certainly some operational issues associated with that, as noted by Lakeland Fire Department and by Solid Waste, but that is something that we have said that we would evaluate in more detail as part of an overall traffic management plan. We've also, again, as mentioned earlier, talked about the brick restoration on Belvedere, which actually brick restoration is probably a better form of traffic management, traffic calming than speed humps and some of the other standard techniques that we have. And there is enough brick underneath Belvedere to be able to do that. West of Florida Avenue, we've already implemented a couple of raised crosswalks on Ariana Street on either side of Dobbins Park near Dixieland Elementary. We recommend raised crosswalks on Missouri and New York at Hillcrest. Those were comments specifically raised during the July public meetings, as well as from business owners in the area. And that ties in also with some enhanced connectivity between the Florida Avenue corridor and Drain Park, as noted in the AIR study. And of course, continued investment in alleyway improvements. That's been an ongoing set of projects through the CRA now for over a decade. And just an improved alley system would help with the short trips that are occurring between businesses and the neighborhoods within the corridor. Again, we've got some pretty substantial needs in terms of north-south investments and infrastructure in the corridor, including the South Wabash extension. And that what's shown on the screen there is would be a 2-lane divided extension of Wabash from Ariana Street down to Hardin to the west side of Lakeside Village. We've analyzed that previously, and really it does show a benefit to Hardin Boulevard and Florida Avenue, and is an important part of our north-south corridor between the Parkway and Interstate 4. We also want to continue to work with the Department of Transportation on widening and operational improvements on US 98 Bartow Road between Edgewood Drive and Main Street. The current plan is to 6-lane the corridor between Edgewood and Commerce Point, with turn lane and signalization intersection improvements from there up to Main. Big issue with that, of course, is the CSX right-of-way that comes up basically to the edge of pavement on US 98, and the cost of attaining an easement or right-of-way to be able to accommodate the improvements. We also have the Lakeland Intermodal Center. Part of this overall plan here is to improve transit service, improve our transit infrastructure. The Lakeland Intermodal Center is a big piece of that, as is Bus Rapid Transit in the Florida Avenue area and up to Interstate 4. So that continues to move forward as well. Those are longer-term investments, but they are part of the bigger picture here of moving people in Lakeland. And then the Central Lakeland Transit Signal Prioritization Project is a funded improvement in 2024 of the DOT work program, and that is really meant to help support the Gold Line and the Pink Line, which run along US 98 Florida Avenue and Lakeland Hills Boulevard. So that's a real improvement that's coming in support of transit service in this area. So you all were at the Christmas parade last night and were able to experience downtown Lakeland as it exists today. But what we want to remind everybody is that we've been here before. I remember back when Lakeland had one-way pairs. When I first moved here in '94, the streets were very, I would say, pretty inhospitable to pedestrians and bicyclists. That has changed. We've got two-way systems. We've got wider sidewalks, enhancements now that really we take for granted. Around Lake Mirror, I don't think anybody can imagine Lake Mirror Park with US Business 92 running around the north and south shores of the lake as it existed until 2007. So as we start to think about Dixieland as an extension of downtown, and we think about the city's quality of life goals that have been repeatedly stated and are included in our comprehensive plan, what we're talking about here for Florida Avenue is not unlike what we've talked about in the past. And so we just want the public and everybody to keep that in mind going forward. In terms of project schedule, depending on the city's commission's decision here, is that we still need to go through a design process as laid out by the Department of Transportation. We would be beginning July of 2023 potentially, about an 18-month design process ending in the end of 2024 to be able to design the ultimate improvement. We need to go through a right-of-way acquisition phase because there are portions of the road corridor today that are outside of right-of-way. So there needs to be acquisition to be able to bring that all into public ownership, and that process takes time. But that could start in early 2025 and end at the end of calendar year 2025, depending on the complexity of that work. The right-of-way acquisition, again, that process is about an 18 to 24 month process. So once we know what we need and we go to acquire it, that takes time, takes funding, and that's probably one of the big critical path items in terms of moving the project forward to construction. And construction would be approximately a two-year process. So you start looking at 2027, as kind of standard point at which construction would begin on this corridor. There are some other things that we're continuously looking at to start to make incremental improvements on the side streets, the intersecting streets. While the focus here is of course on Florida Avenue, we're going to continue to make improvements to the surrounding areas in that time. So we're not waiting 5 years for the public to see benefit. So with that, I will provide an opportunity for Secretary Nandem with DOT to provide closing remarks and any comments and answer any questions that you have from the department's perspective. And we'll stand for any questions afterwards.
Thank you, Chuck. And we appreciate you being here, Secretary Nandem.
Well, Mayor, thank you. And City Commission members really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Before I get into my comments, I want to recognize my staff here, Abraham, Nicole Mills, and Walter. They've been a big part of preparing for this presentation and through the evaluation of the pilot project, so I want to thank them for their time too. So first thing I want to say is we really appreciate the partnership with City of Lakeland. I want you to know that we are part of the community. We very much want to partner with you to help you achieve your vision. So that's what community members do. So I want to say we'll support any decision that you make, right?
Thank you.
For the past 6 years, we've been partnering with the city, starting with the planning study, where we started looking at what a lane repurposing along South Florida Avenue would look like. And at the request of the City Commission, we funded, with a partnership with the TPO, Polk TPO, the pilot project. As you can see, it was not what I would call a popular idea, because it is a pilot project, right? We had to do something to test the impact of lane repurposing from 5 lanes to 3 lanes, so we put concrete separators. It was never intended, like Cindy said, to see the full benefit of what a lane repurposing project would look like, because it did not include the wider sidewalk accommodations, it did not include the landscape implementation. So it really was to evaluate the traffic impacts. So I want to make sure of that. One of the things I told my staff is, when we go and evaluate the pilot project, make sure we are objective, right? And use data to make decisions. And the recommendation from my staff is that, based on what they have seen, which you have seen in the presentation, we would support the 3-lane configuration as presented by city staff. And the reason being is, if you want to achieve the multimodal accommodations, and if you want to achieve the goals that you put forth for Dixieland area, this type of a change for a corridor like South Florida Avenue is needed. Because there's multiple examples around the nation that actually show that when you pursue these kind of projects, you are going to change the character of that area. So I'm confident that the proposed concept is going to achieve what the goals that you set forth for that area. But having said that, we will support whatever decision the City Commission makes, because we are part of the community and will make what the City Commission wants happen. So with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Are there any questions or comments early on? I have one, which, if we could go back 3 slides. Oops, go forward, please, to the arrow slide. Right here. And we've talked about this a little already, but couldn't we do some right-of-way acquiring while we're doing design and phasing, and tighten that a smidge so that we don't have quite as much time that it takes to delay this construction? In other words, is there a way to compress this any tighter? Timeline.
So Mayor, I'm going to respond to it, and then I'll turn it over to your staff to respond. There are opportunities to look at compressing the schedules, but will require some innovative ways of going about it, right?
Okay.
Which will require a lot of effort from the city from a right-of-way acquisition standpoint. Also, different type of procurement methods, that could actually compress the schedule. This is our standard production schedule that we have put out there. But one thing that I would say is, it's not going to compress the schedule too much, but it will definitely save some time.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chuck, and Secretary Nandum for the overview. And I wanted you to comment, if you will, on the comparison between the 3-lane design and the 4-lane option, the no-build scenario, in connection with the feedback about future growth and traffic flow. In my mind, when I look at the no-build versus the 3-lane scenario, I feel like that it's 4 lanes, you have more capacity as we add more people to the roadways, more people coming in and out of downtown. And so I'm just curious if you would comment on that, as we're a growing city, why you're still strongly recommending the 3-lane design.
So let me respond to Mayor, if I may.
Absolutely.
So if you think about a roadway and the number of lanes on a roadway, there's a capacity constraint that always associated with it, right? As the roadway gets to a capacity, traffic generally starts going around to the neighborhood, particularly the principal arterials. And that's what we've seen with this pilot project is the traffic, there's certain amount of traffic that actually moved on to the principal arterials, adjacent. But the one fact that we've observed on South Florida Avenue, because of the configuration that was there before, which is 5-lane typical, but effectively was 3-lane because there was no way 2 vehicles could have actually driven side by side. So we had that offset effect, right? So you're basically, people were not comfortable driving side by side, particularly when you're in a larger vehicle, and particularly when there's a truck that's traveling along there. So it effectively was like operating as a 3-lane facility because of that offset, right? And the growth on South Florida Avenue, if you look at it for the past 10, 15 years, the traffic volumes haven't increased that much. So that kind of tells that the facility actually reached the capacity based on the configuration that's out there, the lane widths that are out there. And when we changed it to the 3 lanes, the amount of traffic that actually diverted was not that much. So that means, it's actually handling whatever traffic that was out there. When you talk about growth, again, it goes back to the network and the capacity of the roadway itself and how the network can actually take the additional traffic that comes through. So when you're looking at a roadway, the amount of growth and all that stuff, you always have to look at it from a network perspective. Because if you start thinking about linear, then you're not effectively taking advantage of what you built as a network.
Thank you. That's helpful because I think I know the feedback we hear when residents know there's an option with more lanes and we're strongly considering the one with fewer, then it starts to become, well, that may not make sense, or why would we pursue that when we have more people coming into the city, more people coming in and out of downtown? So I find that helpful to hear that, Secretary Nandum, your analysis and reminding us to look at the entire roadway network. And interesting about the numbers of cars pre-test and post as well. Chuck, do you have?
And just one more thing to add too is that a 4-lane undivided cross-section, you don't have a full 4 lanes of capacity because of the turning movements that would be occurring in the middle turn lanes. So that's like if you look at Lakeland Hills Boulevard or George Jenkins out by the Citrus Connection, you don't really have a full 4 lanes of capacity because you've got cars stopped in the inside lanes. And that creates another safety issue as well. And so a 3-lane in an urban environment, you get the turn lanes out of the through traffic and it works better.
So it's more efficient, the 3-lane design, than
Exactly.
having 4, in your opinion?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The left turns are the big controlling factor in that capacity.
Commissioner Reed?
Thank you. Again, I've probably been the most negative proponent of this of anybody. People I talk to are the 49%, it appears. And of course, I have some, is this something that DOT is going to fund, or is that something that Lakeland's going to fund? The project?
Yes.
We don't have any money to fund anything now, so and we're on TPO board, and this may be 2040 before it ever gets done, in my opinion. But funding is one a question I was going to ask. Is that something that we're going to do? Is that going to be something that DOT will do?
Our conversations with the city to this point, your staff has been, it's going to be a partnership. So we'll see what we can bring to the table as it relates to the funding to make this particular improvement happen with contributions from the city, from the CRA to actually make this project happen because of the original goals of why this particular lane repurposing was initiated.
Thank you. And of course, I don't know. Did you go on the tour to? It was ironic. I went to UCF and I went to grad school at Rollins. And while I was there, I drove a cab, of all things. And I got to know the Edgewater area quite well. That's not many people could afford it. And of course, when I went on the tour there, we were going to look at the economic component of that area compared to what it would do to Dixieland. And ironically, I grew up on Belvedere Street, and I rode my bike all through Dixieland as well. I worked at Dick's Hardware right across from Maurice Cliff, and so I have a pretty good, I know every alley in the neighborhood over that way. And of course, it has changed dramatically since I was 12 or 13 years old when we came here to Lakeland. And so the people I talk to have seen and it may be COVID related, but their businesses are down because of the road diet. Also, the people that I talked to on side streets, their traffic is up dramatically. All of them are requesting road calming devices from that standpoint. I don't know what the level of service was when we partook of this, but and of course, it's got to be less now than what it would because of traffic. Of course, from my perspective, if we're really going to do a big plan, I think DOT was short-sighted. We should make Florida Avenue north, New York, Missouri south, and then I don't think we need to buy that many houses to circumvent stuff to make that work. But of course, we still haven't talked about anything north of Franklin Wright Drive, and of course up around Pope Theater. That area is going to be affected as well. That was a big component when you stepped out of Pope Theater and Scott Langston's office. You're liable to fall down and trip, and you're going to get killed. That area's not even been discussed right now either. Of course, I have some people sent me some data on crashes, 3 to 5 times as much as rear ends. Of course, my friends on the property, then you can't make a left-hand turn. I don't know how we're going to get some on these lights, particularly at Patterson. There's got to buy some real expensive buildings to do a turn lane if you're going to turn left, every left turn lane. Otherwise, so many guys will go straight. The light will be a change light there, and nobody's going to be able to go left or right. But of course, the other thought, and I've mentioned it several times in our meetings, I don't think anything is going to change in the Dixieland area if we do the road diet until we get some land zoning changes. When you went to Edgewater, it was a blighted area. They put in the roads. When you went over there was a lot of off-street parking. There's some dilapidated buildings they could tear down. Dixieland is probably one of the most expensive real estates in the core of the city, other than maybe in downtown. And until we have additional parking there, we're not going to get much growth, and we'll have a beautiful place to walk. But there's people, where they're going to park to come there to do something. So I see a lot of issues with this, and obviously funding's going to be another one. And like I said, the people I've talked to seem to be negative, but I'm only one of a few. But I wanted to make sure that their voices got heard. But I may reserve my conversation for later. But from that standpoint, I don't think there's going to be any economic growth until we plan it better and we get some zoning code changes. I know we can't do blanket zone changes. We did do some stuff in a CRA over by the west side of the 98, kind of over towards the Lake Mirror. But I don't know if we can do that between Florida Avenue and New York. There's already some commercial zoning on the west side of New York. And I don't know how far we want to go north, but that's just there's a lot more discussion than before I'm ready to endorse this particular project.
Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, both of you, for your presentation. So I basically have 3 kind of comment questions. The first one is, when I was on the CRA board and we did take the trip to Edgewater that Commissioner Reed mentioned, I've been over to Edgewater since, and I would say that it's been successful. You see residential apartment complexes that probably wouldn't have been, positioned there, the traffic, and I think that's kind of the hopes of what we would like to see here in Lakeland. I would be curious with using the Edgewater as an example, and you mentioned others across the country. If we're looking at least 6 more years before we'd have any kind of improvement, and we've already done a 2-year test, is that how long it took for Edgewater Drive? About 8 years?
I want to say Edgewater was probably more in the 5-year range. I mean, I think it happened a little bit quicker because it had a wider envelope to work with. I mean, that's the biggest challenge that we have here is that we've got 60 feet from building face to building face. Edgewater was bigger, so it was a little bit easier for them to be able to to make the necessary improvements. And so that's the challenge here is that we're working within such a tight envelope that the normal processes are a little bit longer, particularly on the right-of-way side. But we do have those options. I mean, that's the good news is that, if we are looking at a small number of parcels and are able to work with the business owners and the property owners and can get the land more quickly because of the benefits that they would see, then we can shorten out that acquisition phase and truncate that schedule as much as we can. I mean, ultimately, we still have to design. There's going to be utility impacts. We've got to look at the utilities and see what upgrades need to happen within that envelope. We need to, get a consensus on, what the ultimate street treatment is. What do the street trees, what do the intersections look like? I mean, there's a lot of detail we have to work through. But I think that what has been mapped out by DOT and the fact that we can tighten up that right-of-way phase to some degree, I think gives us some opportunities to get improvements in a lot quicker than maybe we were once thinking.
Okay, and then my second comment is with regard to the infrastructure money from the federal government. I know that, you mentioned a partnership. Are we pursuing that money and looking into seeing how we would fall in a priority as the Dig a Shovel Ready project?
I'll just say from the city perspective, we've got to have a decision first. I mean, with a decision and a clear direction on what the corridor is going to be in the future, it makes it a lot easier for us to go after grant funding. So I think the decision, from my standpoint, is absolutely key. I'll look to Secretary Nandum on from the department's perspective.
Yeah, and I will say, certainly it takes a decision, but you all know what other projects would be competing for those funds and where we would fall in the priority. That's kind of my question.
What I would suggest, Commissioner, is do not pursue federal funding on this project. The reason is, we've already done a project development study which requires the state requirements. Once you bring federal funding into the picture, that totally brings a different criteria, different requirements, and we'll have to restart the PD&E process, which adds another 2 to 3 years to the schedule.
Okay, 'cause
So-
I've just heard that Polk County's like, what, $1.8 billion short on their road money, so I didn't know. And I don't think this is on that list, is it?
No, it's not, Commissioner.
So, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence that we get a slot on the list anytime soon. That's why I was mentioning if we have other funding sources.
Well, one thing that I can commit is the department's contribution. We will bring it to the table if the commission agrees to go forward with the project. That's a commitment that I've made to Sean, and we will bring our portion of what the project would cost to the table in the next 5 years. That's why we created the schedule the way we created it.
And just to jump in also in terms of the funding categories, the TPO or what DOT would see in the county, Florida Avenue would compete as a complete street project. And that's a little bit of a different animal relative to a traditional capacity project like Bartow Road or the Wabash Extension or New Tampa Highway. So in terms of probably the best example that I have is Lakeland Hills Boulevard. There was a study that was conducted as part of the TPO to look at treatments all the way from Lake Morton up to Granada. And we've been kind of taking piecemeal approach to that over past 6 or 7 years. The section between Parkview and Granada, north of the hospital, was a priority of the city and the TPO probably 2017, 2018, somewhere in that time frame. And from that time to 2024, when construction is budgeted for the entire project, that will take us to construction. And that was something where it went in, it was a competitive process, but it didn't compete with highway capacity. It was with other complete street and safety projects around the county. That project, based on the latest numbers we're seeing, is probably close to $20 million, but that is a complete rebuild of Lakeland Hills Boulevard, middle turn lane, raised medians, 8-foot sidewalks, new street lighting, new stormwater system. That is a full reconstruction of the roadway. So that gives, I think that is a good example to use for Florida Avenue, and that it can be done quickly, and we just got to get the pieces to fit together and move it forward.
Okay, and then my third is kind of with regard to Commissioner Reed's just discussion of the flow within the neighborhood. So, you know, I've been a proponent of it having as many pinch points as possible to get people to take other north-south thoroughfares, that it's a neighborhood street, and kind of reclaiming it for the neighborhood is sort of what, in my mind, makes sense. Certainly we need the Wabash extension to be able to relieve Hardin, and then, you know, Hardin can take more pressure off of this corridor. But, you know, as someone who lives on the west side of South Florida, I feel like as we're closing the west-east divide and focusing on downtown west, people will naturally take Missouri, New York, some of those other roads, because you kind of think there's something west of, you know, South Florida. Whereas right now, it's like you're on Florida or you're on Hardin, there are no roads in between, and I ride them every day, and there's no one on them. So there's plenty of, you know, room for growth on those streets. But are we looking at, you said that there's not a lot of diversion from the current path to those roads, which I'm seeing the evidence of that, but, you know, traversing the west-east to get to City Hall or to get into, you know, this, are you looking at all at the signalization? Because I know that's one of my biggest pain points, and I know that it's noted from the neighbors within the diet at Belmar and at that's right before the signalization, but all the different signalizations have, you know, we've collected that feedback. I'm kind of, if you're trying to get people to go a little bit farther north-south, not just neighbors inside the diet, I would think you'd need to really look at the signalization west-east from New York, Missouri, over to Kentucky, Tennessee, you know, for the people who work at Summit and downtown at Publix and every City Hall. So has that been something that's been done yet, or not yet?
There are evaluations that are underway, you know, and of course, we've got a standing request to look at the left turn signal, say at Frank Lloyd Wright in Florida. We have talked about Orange Street as being a particular issue because of where it is on the merge point. I mean, that's been one of the biggest complaints that we've heard is the length of time that it takes to make a left turn off of Florida and the length of time that it takes to cross Florida.
Yeah.
And so that's the ultimate, those are going to be ongoing discussions. And so even with the permanent improvement, the permanent cross-section in place, the signalization, the operations of that corridor are going to be absolutely part of that. And I know DOT and they may be talking about that now, but I know that that's part of an ongoing evaluation because that is a big concern that we have.
Because I know we're looking at the signalization within the grid on the east side, you know, downtown, which I'm thrilled about, but I feel like that whole west side that is a ghost town, you know, will start to revitalize, you know, as we do move west. And, you know, then I'll think, you know, you think about the Polk Theater and behind the theater and St. Joseph's Church and, you know, some of those areas back there, you know, I know that that's in the future, but to me, it's kind of like with pedestrian traffic. You don't walk on a road that doesn't feel safe or doesn't feel like pedestrians should walk on that. I feel like people haven't even explored those options on that part of the grid. You know, like I have, whether it's on my bike or in my car, going from Beacon Hill to downtown, that's the route I've taken instead of Florida Avenue. It doesn't seem like a lot of people are doing that.
So Commissioner, you know, when we did the pilot project, right, we were just focusing on putting the concrete separators to get the 3 lanes in, to do the test that you guys wanted us to do, right? The commission wanted us to do. But part of the evaluation was what are the lessons learned, what are the main adjustments that we need to make. You know, as an example, we looked at there's some rear-end crashes that are happening at the merge points, right, at the either end of the project. So we're looking at what interim solutions we can implement, but also when we get into design, if the commission chooses to go forward with this project, what is the effective solution that need to be implemented? So the traffic signal control, we are already going through the evaluation of where do we need to look at left turn signal additions to actually accommodate what you're talking about. Because once you took the 2 lanes out, the amount of gaps that are available for people to make left turns, you know, they kind of reduce, right? So we're looking at, okay, so what did that do to the left turn movement, the efficiencies of the left turn movement, and do we need to make changes to that? So all those things are being evaluated based on what we've observed from the pilot project and will be incorporated into the final product if the commission chooses to go.
Well, I'm hopeful you'll use signals like, that it tells us when the railroad track, you know, when the train's coming to divert. I even think that if you had noticed that there was openings, or this would be your most prime area to turn left to go onto New York or to go onto Missouri, if those were noted to the path, you know, people on the path, that they would take those. I don't know if people are just exploring those options on their own. You know, you can kind of direct them to those areas, like you were saying, using that New York and that Missouri, maybe it's not for a north and a south, but even if they used it at all, it would clear up traffic on South Florida.
I use them now.
Me too.
Commissioner McCarley.
And I have a couple different notes, but on that note, I've used that from the neighborhood I live in, that's at the corner of Beacon and South Florida, for years, going to Lawton Childs, take my children, going to Lincoln, so I became really intimately familiar driving those roads even before the road diet, and they were a lot more pleasurable than South Florida has ever been. And the speed is better on those streets because they're surface streets. A couple notes I just wanted to ask is, one, Chuck, if you could remind the public at large that how we came to this point was really from the Dixieland residents. Will you just do a short quip about that history?
Sure. Kind of, my perspective goes back to the early 2000s. So we've been working on this for about 20 years. And, you know, really Florida Avenue was the focus of the Dixieland Community Redevelopment Agency. That was the main focal point of, you know, how do you bring business back into, at that point in time, a declining commercial corridor. And so as we started to look at different options on how to address Florida Avenue, there were no good options. I mean, medians and 4 lanes without a turn lane, and all of them had issues. And we were hearing also concerns from the Dixieland neighborhood and the South Lake Morton neighborhood as well, because, you know, folks wanted to be able to walk across to the post office, or they wanted to go to the Reese Cliff, or there were destinations that they wanted to go to then, and just, you know, didn't feel safe doing that. And so we've looked at multiple different ways, both on the transportation side and on the land use and zoning side, the parking inventory side, starting in '03. And probably every 2 or 3 years, we've gone back and looked, and there wasn't an option that was a clean option, that was the aha moment that you know, everybody was in support of. I mean, it really depends on your perspective. And so that's where, when the CRA came back again in 2014 and requested a revisit of the corridor again, that led to DOT investing in the master plan that began in 2016, ended in 2017 with a resolution, and started the process we're in now. It was that ultimately, 60 feet from building face to building face at maximum, we had to start looking at the road differently. And it wasn't, again, you know, I think for a long time we had looked at how do we move cars in a smaller space instead of how do we move people in a smaller space. So it became, okay, what do we need to do to get the sidewalks widened? Because that was the real issue. I mean, back in Vito's, you'd go in there and cars would go by, and either you would get hit with stormwater or you'd feel the vibration of the trucks on the doors in the front of the building. And so there was a livability, there was a quality of life, and as those neighborhoods on both sides were redeveloping, because 30 years ago, South Lake Morton and Dixieland, you know, they were neighborhoods in decline. And to bring them back and to then put a focus on Florida Avenue, we had to look at it differently. And so that's where DOT and its philosophy statewide changed from, you know, road diet will only happen if a local government takes over the roadway. In about 2016, it changed to, we will work with the local government to implement a solution for the local government supports and the community supports, and that's where we are today. So we've been chipping away at it for 20 years, and there hasn't been anything that really got us to where we needed to be, short of a 3-lane section, and that's why our recommendations are what they are today.
Well, and I think I'm glad you provided all that history, because I think it's really important for the public at large to understand that it was a groundswell of discussion that was happening in the Dixieland CRA and in and around from the neighborhood itself. So it's not a whim that has just sort of come out of nowhere in the last couple of years right before COVID, and that this has been a very long-term piece, you know, that we've been looking at and working on. To that same point, I had an office in Dixieland for a couple of years and could hear the crashing of the mirrors, the side mirrors, when you're talking about people riding side by side. It was not easy to ride side by side to another car. I drive a big SUV. I could never be, if I was beside someone, I'd be really anxious. So when we look at our ISO rating and our insurance rating for the city of Lakeland, I know that failing roads like George Jenkins Boulevard or like Lakeland Hills or even like, you know, this road was before we actually put in and did the road diet, has, when you look at those crashes, the crash data is, yes, we might have more rear ends, but we're having rear ends at a lower speed, and then we're having less catastrophic events that are happening on that roadway. How does that impact our insurance as far as local members of a community and driving and traversing? And maybe that's something more for Secretary Nandum to talk about, but how does that impact us overall as a community when we have safer roads?
I mean, I will say, I don't know what impact it has on auto insurance and the rates that the individual, because I know like with mine, because I'm in Polk County, Florida, it's naturally higher because Florida has higher auto insurance rates. But I will say from an overall community and livability and health outcome standpoint, is that when you have a lower particularly pedestrian and bicycle crash rate, you improve, you know, not only the lives of folks that may not have another option to get around, you know, so you've got the folks that don't have a car, the folks that want to be able to go out and bike and walk. So there's, you know, I mean, for the longest time, we were the 5th most obese metro area in the country. And it's because we had no trails, no sidewalks, and for the investments, you know, $5 to $6 million a year that the TPO and DOT are putting into sidewalks and trails in Polk County are helping us improve in that category. You couldn't get to a transit stop, you know, there are no sidewalks to buses. And so those types of things, there are, you know, and these are things that take a lot longer, you know, and that's why we've got to take a longer view on some of these things, because it takes a while to look at the impacts on, I mean, the safety is a little bit more immediate, but in terms of the health outcomes and the benefits to, I will say, livability and connectivity, it will take a while for us to get there. But if we don't have the infrastructure, if the only way people have to get around is by car, we are not going to improve those outcomes. And there are also, you know, I mean, you see it, you know, nationally, we don't have as much in here, but nationally, you know, you've got, air pollution impacts. You know, if you're in a neighborhood and everybody has to drive, you don't have the street trees, you don't have the correct mix of transportation options, you know, you end up with breathing difficulties, and you have other issues that, you know, you see in more lower income portions of the community, because the infrastructure typically in other places aren't as good as what you have overall in the city of Lakeland. And so, I mean, those things from an insurance standpoint, I don't have an answer to that, but longer term, we will start to see improving trends in some of those other indicators.
I think the ISO rating I'm talking about is more about fire rescue and just how it looks as far as calls for things like that. So that's something we can have later on whenever we get to this point. But that was more of my question with regard to their rating overall, not necessarily to individual insurance rates.
So, Commissioner, I'm not an expert on insurance, but your point did bring up something I forgot to mention. You know, we, as a state of Florida, we adopted Target Zero. That means 0 fatalities and severe injuries, right? And Lakeland, Winter Haven area, and Polk County are one of the focus areas for us as it relates to bike ped fatality rates and, you know, the regular vehicle fatality rates. So it's one of our community of concern. You know, treatments like this and change in character of the community and the roadway like this to create that safe environment and providing multimodal accommodations and revitalizing that particular area will result in slower speeds, which in result actually reduces the severe injury and fatal crashes. And that's what you mentioned. You know, I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yes, thank you. Any other comments by commissioners? Commissioner Musil.
Yeah, I actually have a decent couple of questions, if we can maybe just answer them one at a time as we go through. So first off, in reference to the College Park Edgewater area that was rehabbed, how similar are they? When we're talking about 60 feet, you know, from building to building, is there enough similarities for us to use this as a model?
I believe that it's a good model from an urban form standpoint, but you're still probably looking at 80 feet. Maybe a little wider than that, but it is definitely wider than what we're looking at here. This is unique.
Okay, so the other question is, when we are looking at, say, this timeline, and it's good to have dates because it gives us at least some opportunity to envision that, but with us not having any budget, I mean, at this point, the numbers, the dates are irrelevant, correct? I mean, we don't have money sitting aside to be able to do this at this point.
Correct, and that's, and there's some CRA dollars, and that's where, you know, in the draft DOT work program, we get a line item in there that would allow us to have a focal point to say that there's a project. Then that gives us the ability to look at local resources and through the budgeting process, strategic planning process, to put that funding together for the next, you know, for the next year and beyond.
The, when I was at the meeting that we had at the RP Funding Center, we had all the citizens there, and we had that really nice blow up right in the center that showed all of the things. I was talking with Mr. Phillips with the Citrus Connection, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I guess you guys have done this better than I would, but right now we are not running down South Florida.
We're doing circulators on our
So
side.
his position when I was speaking with him was that's how he would like to keep it and not run down South Florida. Is that how I'm understanding this?
That's-
Because when I looked
Unless
at
there's
that.
a bus rapid transit, and that's a different animal completely, because it wouldn't stop in that area. It would rapidly go from one to
Like a car.
like a car.
So, okay, so then I must have been looking at the wrong picture, because it looked like one of the pictures had a bus pull in right there by the,
Right by Southside.
Right there.
But that's just a rendering, right, Chuck?
Exactly, and so the request is, or the recommendation is to continue with the circulator service, but, you know, of course, looking, you know, 20, 30 years down the road, keeping opportunities open for bus bays or some other option for a bus in, you know, say in northbound, southbound direction to be able to pull out of the travel lane and have a large stop depending on what happens from a redevelopment standpoint. And so this is for illustration purposes only, but really the intent is to keep the circulator for the foreseeable future.
so one of the problems that renderings do for me is the same thing that these concrete pillars do. We know they're not long-term, but that's what they see, right? So when I'm looking at that and I see, well, my mind said we didn't need a bus stop there. Okay, so that answers that question, thank you. And,
But you're right.
what's that?
You're right.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because again, if we're getting this information out there and people are seeing renderings, they're going to say that. So, you know, and I think that pretty much answers most of my questions, but I will say, having come on the commission after this was enacted, the study, I have not had, I guess, the same response from people reaching out that maybe you have. I mean, I'm getting people constantly giving me nothing but negative feedback, so it was good to hear and to see some of the positive feedbacks. But I mean, you know, I've got friends they'll literally hit start record on their phone when they leave their office, and they won't turn it off till they get home, and then they send me a 9-minute video. You know, here's what my day was like. So, you know, I'm trying to wrap my head around the idea that this is excellent, and having grown up in this area my whole life and driven dump trailers down that road thinking the same thing, dear Lord, let me stay straight, right? You know, I think that is, we certainly know that we need something. I mean, that's a foregone conclusion from everybody. But I'm just trying to look and sit when we look and see that there were almost 12 options, and then we're trying to look and say, this is the best one, when I look and think the same thing that Commissioner McLeod. More lanes seems like a smart thing, so not being a traffic study engineer, I think that is great. I don't know, I guess I'm still trying to struggle and wrap my head around, you know, a major thoroughfare in our road not being used anymore. And I live off of Beacon, so I try to go down any other way I can, right? So, and one more thing, right, for you, so do we want on a major road, right, where regardless, South Florida is a major road, what's the thought on wanting to have bike lanes on a major thoroughfare? Because when I think of you, Commissioner, from your house to City Hall, you can go back New York, you can go all kinds of
They've
ways
eliminated them.
that don't have that. Okay, so that is not a portion of that anymore, okay.
But in exchange for the larger sidewalks, and so the bike would share with the
You
pedestrians.
could navigate through there. It wouldn't be like a,
Okay,
But it
so not
gives you
taking up
corridor.
roadway though, but we are taking
Right.
up some of the roadway with a 12-foot wide sidewalk.
So If I may, Commissioner.
Please.
So to your point about the number of lanes that were there before to what this proposal would create to what the future would look like if the city commission doesn't agree, right? So I want to repeat what we had before. It's a 5-lane section, 8.5 to 9-foot lanes. That means people could not drive side by side, they were staggered, right? Which actually increased speeds because now you're traveling staggered. The second thing is, if we don't go with this concept, if the commission chooses not to go with the concept, we'll support it. It'll be a 4-lane typical section. When I say 4 lanes, it's 2 lanes either direction without a turn lane. Because when we had that, it was grandfathered in, we did not adjust the turn lanes unless we reconstruct the roadway. The current standards suggest that the minimum lane width for that type of a facility is 11 feet. So we would, because it's only 60 feet, you would have 4 11-feet lanes without a turn lane. So effectively, depending on the amount of left turning traffic and how many turns there are cross streets and driveways, effectively the inside lanes will be acting as left turn lanes.
Right.
So something that you need to keep in mind that it may not be the number of through lanes that you're thinking about at the end of the day if we went only with 4 lanes.
Yeah, and I think really the citizens that are talking with me, they're not as concerned about how many lanes, right? I mean, what they're concerned about is the time it takes from them to get from A to B. That's their concern. And then my sister lives on Palmalla, and she has a heck of a time turning out, right, off of Palmalla onto South Florida. Because there's a barrier almost right there, and then because it's 1 lane, they're just backed up. So she can't get, and if somebody's not kind, they won't be able to go out there. So those are just kind of the day-to-day, idiosyncrasies that I'm hearing about that. And because it was grandfathered in, and the road was as it was, even though it was non-conforming, we really kind of snookered ourselves by doing this test, because then we couldn't go back. Is that correct?
No, I mean,
Snookered may not be the right word.
from
Snookered, we put ourselves into a corner,
Yes.
right? I mean, we cannot go back to what we were because we changed it. Is that correct?
Commissioner, when we would have to come and resurface this roadway and address the drainage issues that we have, right? So whenever we come out to do that particular improvement, that particular outcome would have been discussed. So your request for a pilot study did not, it probably sped it up, right, as it relates to the decision making, but at some point we would have had to make that decision.
Okay.
So a comment I would make is that we all suffer a little bit from wanting to make binary decisions. So it either works or doesn't work. I can either get through fast or I can't get through quickly, or I can't. And the problem is this iteration isn't attempting to address one thing, which is just the speed through the corridor. This iteration is attempting to address safety. It's attempting to revitalize an area in terms of its ability to be more thriving economically for pedestrians to work through. It is an attempt to push traffic off to other corridors at the same time so that it's not being used as a thoroughfare if they're going downtown. Most people negative about this realignment are negative because they can't get through as fast as they used to get through. That's the goal. The goal is lower speeds. The goal is more safety. The goal is cutting fatalities down on a long-term basis and vulnerability along the sidewalks. And so if you work to have to merge all these things together, then what happens is then it begins to make more sense. And if we don't do the multiple levels of consideration taking place here, we can't look at this as a binary decision because it isn't one. And when we want to approach it as a binary decision and not a good long-term decision, then and 4 lanes, frankly, does that. 4 lanes is an attempt to address the binary need to move quickly. Then all of a sudden, we continue to move quickly through there, and then we'll have left turn stops. It's like feeling on George Jenkins. When you get in the left turn inside lane to turn left, it doesn't feel safe when you're watching people come behind you quickly. And so I think we need to talk about the fact that this is really bringing together multiple levels of goals in a much safer arena for us to be able to be more enthusiastic about the process.
And that was the exact issue kind of going back to the downtown example with Lemon, Main, Lake Mirror Drive, because that was the exact same concern, and that was US Business 92, is that, we got to get through downtown as quickly as we can, and it was tough to kind of look at, okay, what is the long-term, what are the impacts going to be to our downtown environment? And what is that going to mean in terms of walkability and all the other things that were really starting to come out in the early to mid 1990s? And so that's the same thing here. 12-foot wide sidewalks here is a huge win. And instead of looking at it from the road out, we've been trying to look at it perhaps as going from out in, and what are some of the more critical gaps in our system. And it's really in this area too, is the sidewalks and the pedestrian environment.
I know Commissioner McLeod has something, and Mr. Ruiz as well, so I don't know. Okay, Commissioner McLeod.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. And kind of along your comment about the timeline, Chuck, can you just remind us, if we adopt staff's recommendation, when will residents begin to see some changes along this stretch? Because when I look at this, I think it's possible to take it as we'll have the concrete curbing for the next 5 years, and you really won't see anything until, best case scenario, end of 2027. But it sounds like there are options and there are things that we can do in that window to start to change the appearance.
Correct, and so what we'll, and I'll look to Mr. Roos or Mr. Strauss here, is that a lot of this is going to start with the decision, then how do we break out an overall traffic management plan for the area as part of the budgeting process for next year. And so we look at what do we do in terms of budgeting the design phase for Florida Avenue? What do we do in terms of budgeting the improvements that we were talking about on Missouri and New York in terms of the raised crosswalks? When can we get the brick restoration underway on Belvedere and start to lay out those pieces of the puzzle to say, Florida Avenue may take a little while. It may take 4 or 5 years, to see the big project come to fruition. But during that time, there are other things that will be happening immediately to show that we're implementing the overall plan. And that's the big concern is we want to be able to show that we're not just focused on, while, the discussion mostly is on Florida Avenue, there are other needs that have come out of this public engagement process that we will be addressing, and that's all part of the budgeting process and working with Public Works, Parks and Recreation, other departments to be able to make that happen.
Okay, go ahead.
Mine are more sum up, so please.
All right, Commissioner Madden.
Okay, so, I'm looking at my colleagues to see when we're pivoting towards our personal decision versus just our questions. Looks like we're still asking questions, but I'm ready to move forward. Yesterday. And so I'm excited about the CRA. I'm excited that Valerie's here. I love to look at the glossy pictures that are in the CRA document. And I'm even more excited that Dixieland is going to participate in the LEDC's GIS mapping for developers. And I think that I've asked the questions with which how this would be funded. And I'm hopeful that just like we didn't have money to build a parking garage, but we were able to do a P3 with the developer to get one sooner than we anticipated, could potentially be a solution in this neighborhood. And if I think about the city that I dream of for my children and my grandchildren, it's not more of North 98 or South 98. It is for a 12 South Nashville. It is a revitalized historic district that is walkable from the west to the east side of Florida Avenue. And I am excited about the potential. I look at these, I've wanted glossy pictures from the beginning. I've told you I feel like I'm in the kitchen remodel and I can't see, I didn't get to pick the tile or the fixtures or anything. And it's just a wreck and I can't eat food. So I wish that we could have started 2 years ago. I know that we had to delay the test because of COVID and to get real numbers. If I had a magic wand in my city and what I dreamed for my city, it would be a walkable, vibrant, historic district from west to east of Florida Avenue. It would not be a wider road for more cars and more traffic. And we're going to hear traffic everywhere in our city as we grow. But what kind of growth do we want? What do we want our city to look like? We're hoping for more density, for more multifamily in this area so that people on the west side can walk without putting their life in jeopardy to get to Belmar, to get to Lake Hollingsworth, instead of driving their car across the road to go park in the Lake Hollingsworth parking lot. So I am a resounding yes, move forward. I don't know if we have more questions or if we're making a motion today, but I did want to make sure we had plenty of time to ask questions and address citizen concerns. My only, wish is that a developer's listening and is wanting to look at the LEDC's new GIS map with the CRA and says, let's build a parking garage and a multifamily and let's get this area revitalized.
So do you want to make a motion?
I move to accept the
Before you do
recommendation.
that, I think it depends partly on what the DOT is looking for. I mean, this is a DOT road. If they're just looking to get the idea of what the city commission wants to do, that's fine. If they need more formal action, I think that would take the form of a resolution, which would need to come back to the city commission.
We would want to do that, but I'm talking about as a thumbs up motion.
Okay.
Okay. Would you like to do that? Have it-
Well, I want to have, guys, I'll wait, talk in a minute, we can talk after we make a resolution.
Mr. Ruiz, I wanted to hear his round out.
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, for the record, Brian Ruiz, Director of Community and Economic Development. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank additionally the CED staff who have worked on not only this presentation, but worked so closely with the DOT now for decades, if certainly the last 4 or 5 years, with Cindy Glover here, Teresa Mayo, Jason Willey, Valerie Farrell now with the CRA, and certainly predominantly Chuck Barnby, who you got a sense from that this is a 2-decade in the making proposition that you are considering today.
Yeah.
If it was easy, we would have solved it 2 decades ago. And so, Mr. Mayor, when you talked about the binary nature of the decision or the inappropriateness of that viewpoint, the word that sprung to me was balance, is that we are trying to balance everyone's needs through this corridor, not just the motoring public. So
That's good.
with that, I think, and the Secretary certainly can clarify, but this began with a resolution from the City Commission in 2017 supporting and requesting that the DOT pilot this study. So we have expected that with direction from the Commission at this workshop, that we would then bring back a resolution supporting one of the 2 options, opining on the success of the pilot study, and we are prepared to draft that and bring it back to you at your convenience.
So how do you want to handle the thumbs up process in this?
I think it'd just be a direction to draft a resolution saying what you want it to say, and we need to hear what you want that resolution to say.
I move to draft a resolution approving the staff's recommendation for the road diet
Of option 1,
with the 3-lane, that was the staff's recommendation.
right?
Can I second it
Oh, yes?
for dialogue?
Yeah,
Okay,
for dialogue.
I'll second it.
You're throwing me off, but yes, go ahead.
You just want to act like he's friendly right now for a second before he gives us
Go
a
ahead.
no.
Motion made and seconded. So for dialogue purposes.
Thank you. There again, I think everybody understands something needs to be done. There's no question about it, and I concur. Dixieland could be Hyde Park. It's just got to, it needs a shot in the arm, or maybe a big kick in the rear end. But there again, we have issues.
Depends where you park.
Yeah, we get, and you'll have to forgive me, these numbers may be wrong, but I think we get $2.7 million from the gas tax from the county. $2.5 million goes for maintenance of roads. We have $200,000 to build roads with. That's going to take 100 years to finance this thing at $200,000 if it's $20 million. The funding is my big issue. And of course, there again, if it stays like it is when we do a 5-year process, these businesses are going to die. I really think they're going to die on the vine, a slow death, because I think people are gradually moving away from the area because of the concerns. Lincoln's growing in different directions. And we're going to have an Edgewater beach. We're going to have an Edgewater drive there in the future. It's going to be Dixieland area. It's a difficult situation, and it's going to get worse before it gets any better. But still haven't grasped whether I think I'm just for it now. Again, I don't know the alternatives, other than, like I said, I think it's gonna need some zoning changes and it's gonna have to happen, maybe not simultaneously, or maybe in advance. That's what I keep talking about. We need to do something. I've been talking about it for 2 years and it's gone this far. And I don't know if it's a neighborhood, I don't know if it's our zoning department, who's initiates it. I haven't been able to get to Dixieland meeting, for one reason or another. But, and of course, as we talked about this morning, we're having massive layoffs all over the United States of hundreds of thousands of jobs, and I don't know what it's gonna be for the next couple of years. But I really have some major concerns, but it can be what we want it to be. But I don't know if now's the right time.
I would encourage us to listen carefully to what we heard with respect to funding, and I think that it's important to recognize we have some sources internally for funding that we can do within the CRA. Funding obviously is a major consideration, but we also have engineering to do, and we have to do right-of-way access to create some estimates, and there may be some ability for FDOT to support us differently with time, which we would encourage and hope to be able to attain. That doesn't put them on a commitment to do so because they have a lot of pressures in lots of places within the district to do funding like this. But I am encouraged that there is not a, no, this is exactly what the number would be and there's not going to be any more, that there's actually some desire to see how much support can be created with time. And so if we begin the process, and we recognize that if we don't begin this process, then it's just more of same, and we continue to create the delay, and we put at abeyance the ability for that area to start to thrive more, then we aren't showing leadership, we're just showing our inability to make a decision, as opposed to provide the direction, get going on what's too long a process too, for me, in my mind also, but I have great respect for the needs and the appropriateness, and sometimes hurry is more costly and not as effective. I think we owe it to on the major corridor that connects to our downtown from the south, we owe it to our citizens to show the leadership to do what we know ultimately we need to do to balance all of the initiatives that we're trying to put together within this, and one that our staff supports, who works full-time on making these kinds of considerations meaningful in the most effective ways for our city. Okay, you want to, we don't have to do any conversation?
I would think that that would be appropriate. I think there are some people from the public here. I mean, there'd be another opportunity to comment once we consider the resolution, but we do have people here from
I
the
always will
public.
take your lead, sir. So,
Well, and Mr. Brown, just, I mean, it is a workshop, so it is you and the commission's call, but with Palmer's advice. But certainly if we come back with a resolution, there's that opportunity as well, so.
typically in a workshop, we don't have to provide customer comments, well, they are customers, citizen comments, and wouldn't need to, but if somebody wants to, and we can keep it relatively, there's not that many people in the room, I'd be happy to entertain citizen comments that would, if somebody wants to make them. Sure, come on up, yes. Either one you want, whatever makes you most comfortable.
I don't know if I can get my pad down here, but I'm Trey Harden. I know many of y'all, and I'm concerned, sorry about that, about the funding issue. I listened to Commissioner Reed and tend to agree with him that there may be different alternatives. I like for what it's worth for me, the 2-lane north, 2-lane south option. And I just wonder if it's premature for the commission to take action at this point. We're talking about funding, we're talking about a lot of findings that don't necessarily support the increase or support going down to 3 lanes and having all this traffic coming through. So would just like to say that, and think that it's prudent to take time. And I know that it's been a long time, but really take a look at this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Please come up to the mic, sir, and just introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Ray Moses. I've lived in Lakeland since 1959. I worked with Florida Department of Transportation in Bartow for 40 years. The last 30, I did alternative analysis. I was project manager with Pat Steed on the North Florida Avenue from Main Street to Memorial. I did the study on 98 from Interstate 4 north. And I'm not sure what criteria was given for this project, but it seemed like it was everything inside the box. Don't think outside the box. As a project manager, if I looked at that Florida Avenue for 1 hour, I say we got to go outside the box. That's outside the existing right-of-way. And looking at the maps at the public workshop, the only alternative for this project is Missouri Avenue and New York Avenue to the west, starting in the neighborhood of Lawton Childs School on North Florida, taking it down through the vacant lot, tying in with Missouri, going south, and at some point, Missouri Avenue dead ends before it gets to the Dixieland area. So you probably have to reverse over to New York Avenue and go on down to the end of the bottleneck. Now, the city just approved 500 residents on Edgewood. They either go east to 98 or west to Florida Avenue. That means you're going to have more. And what you're doing with 3-lane in Florida Avenue is a bottleneck. It won't work. No more than what's there worked. Matter of fact, I was very surprised when they did it. I said, somebody's on vacation. Because in 30 years I did this type of work, that would never have been an option. Because we're given the task of providing transportation at a reasonable cost and safety. Now, it's, in my opinion, this doesn't match. So Florida Avenue and Missouri, you already got the 2 lanes there. All you'd have with transfers, of course, you'd have to do some rework, which it needs to be 6 lanes, 3 lanes in each direction. And the 3 lanes on Florida Avenue would terminate at Lime Street, and the left lane would be forced left on down to Hardin Boulevard or Kathleen Road North.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Because north there is,
You're done.
my time up.
Time.
I don't know, I'm retired.
That's okay. We understand here.
Bottom line is, this just putting a Band-Aid on it,
Okay,
Thank you.
and not a very good one. Because
that's it.
There's going to be a resolution coming back, so you'll have
We'll
another
have more
opportunity to
time.
speak.
We'll have a lot more time to
but
talk.
anyhow, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. And I think when you think about the planning and you're considering it as a through road, that is accurate. And on a through road basis, we might come to that conclusion. So it's the other considerations that we're trying to balance as well. Okay, any other comments by the public? All right, then let's do those,
This voice vote's fine.
by what?
Voice vote's fine for this.
Voice vote, fine. All those in favor of, I see Commissioner Music.
Yeah, and if I can take just a minute, because I hate, sometimes I feel, and I've talked to city attorney about this, sometimes I feel when this stuff comes in front of me that either I haven't done my due diligence or I'm playing catch up on something, and yet to go, and I know this is just a resolution, we know but
Right.
we are using this to take the next step, and I want to be diligent, and I appreciate that.
Yes,
I
sir.
probably had a myopic view, so by talking about Ruiz's comments and yours about looking at the entirety of not just traffic being part of it, and Commissioner Madden's passion towards the creation of that, what I am struggling with though is if this resolution goes forward, or is this resolution that we are saying that this option that is sitting in front is what we are wanting them to move forward with? Because I haven't looked or analyzed, and have we looked and analyzed the other 11 that were up there?
What's what the July 11th meeting was.
So we took all of that when we
Right,
were there
yes.
talking with that and whittled that down to
To
this.
this option one.
Okay.
And to that end, and really to really put all of this into the context of a traditional transportation project, is that the test that's been underway for 2.5 years now is really the same as what we would call a project development environmental study, where you look at multiple options, very similar to what the AIRS report had shown. And we go back, take a look at the data and the crashes, look at the volume, look at the operations, and come up with a set of recommendations. Most of the time with transportation projects, there's not the decision drives the funding source and the funding allocations going forward. So most projects don't have a dedicated funding source immediately behind the PD&E study. So what the decision would be, whatever the decision is it would give us now the ability to go back and look at the funding, both on Florida Avenue and the intersecting streets. The staff recommendation is based on the crashes, the volume, the performance of the corridor. So it's really between the city professional staff and the DOT professional staff, with all of the public comment, the 4,000 public comments we've received, coming up with what we believe strikes the best balance, as Mr. Ruiz said. So kind of what we've done is the equivalent of an alignment study that would be done for a traditional transportation project to lead towards a recommendation that then would guide future funding investments going forward.
Okay, so if you're in favor, Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, a question. If we move this forward, Chuck and staff, when would you expect this resolution to come back for our final vote?
I mean, I would be ready
Next.
December 19th
Yeah,
at the
okay,
the next meeting.
And I know Palmer would be, you can see it
Yes.
on his face.
I was hoping you weren't going to say Monday.
Yeah, no, we won't put you quite that hard. That's nice.
It is only 3 o'clock.
Yes, Commissioner McCarthy.
Chuck, there's opportunity when you start, and you don't have to go into detail, but when we talk about complete streets, there are funding streams that are usable in grants and different things too. So it's not just a solely City of Lakeland, solely FDOT. Like, there's a myriad of opportunity that can come alongside. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
And Commission, I mean, as you're aware, we have strategic planning in February now, and so we'll have the opportunities to have some discussions about infrastructure prioritization and or reprioritization, plus, what other options there may be, of which there has been some discussions, but some of that is also predicated upon the direction to move forward in a particular direction. And now we will have some time to prepare to speak to that.
Commissioner Madden?
And I just had one more comment. We're talking about the speed of getting those businesses, viable and safe, and getting those sidewalk extended depends on us making a decision. So if we can get those sidewalks extended, those neighbors safe, and we have a 3-lane road, I can't imagine that, 10 years from now or whenever, we couldn't also then look at New York and Missouri and those things. But if we from the beginning have to look through all that, we will talk about putting those businesses at risk for waiting for another decade or more of any action in that corridor. I just feel like, we need to start moving forward with this. I don't feel like this precludes something, a decade from now that they couldn't do.
You're putting a lot of pressure on me.
I am trying to sell you before doing my best sales
And
pitch.
of course, they're getting, and if I may, they're getting, we've got to make a decision on something. And of course, there again, my thoughts are, I think the hard decision may be the best one. And the hard decision is to address Missouri, New York, and Florida Avenue. And for that reason, I'm gonna be voting no.
Okay.
Because I think that's gonna be the better alternative in the long run, to have that area in between to be our Hyde Park, as opposed to just a fringe on Florida Avenues as far as it's gonna go but if we have a perimeter road where they can get in and out different ways, Ariana, Lincoln Avenue, Lake Hunter, it's gonna be better in the long run. And actually our road work, it's already there to most park. And I don't think it's nearly as expensive to knock down a couple houses and go that way, but I'm only one.
I promise this will be the last one if I can just.
You don't have to promise. You don't have to promise.
I because I've had so many people give me negative comments, and I appreciate the amount of work and effort and energy that has been put into this. I think we are elected to make decisions based on the best information that is here. Do I understand correctly that we believe that there is going to be funding available from multiple sources and the city will have that without us coming back at a budget meeting and saying, we're short, we need X number of dollars? Because we don't have a budget, we don't have anything, and that makes me nervous.
Correct.
To be able to just say, yes, I approve, let's go do this thing, money be damned, right? I mean, it's gotta be, so we feel confident in that?
The majority of the funding is already available or will become available?
Correct.
I would feel pretty confident in that.
And?
I would say that once the decision is made, that I'm confident that we've got the funding for the design. And out of the design, we will have more detail on what is needed for the right-of-way and the construction. And I'm confident that the funding streams that we have are available to fund the project. It would be a question of the mix of local funding versus DOT and other, but I am confident those streams are there.
Okay.
Commissioner, I think I made this statement before that we are committed to bring our portion of the funding to this project. We've already figured that out, so.
I appreciate it. I just have to answer.
But,
You know,
and that's a great question.
That's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Just to be clear, a vote today is simply directing the preparation of a resolution. It's not a vote on whether you ultimately will support that resolution on the 19th.
Correct. And you have made that clear, and thank you very much. All right, voice vote, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Unanimously passes for the resolution. Thank you. Thank you for all your work to make that happen.